All right, so hit the record button. And we'll get started. All right, so welcome everyone. Chris Berry at, oh, 1 second. I'm getting some feedback. All right, now we're looking good. All right, so I'm at my Bloomfield Hills office today, different background. We do these webinars once a week, every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, where I just log in and answer any questions that have been submitted either from the week or that are asked live while I'm doing this. And I really enjoy these because we used to do workshops, like in-person workshops on different topics, and I enjoyed that. But this is, in the pandemic world, our best alternative. So I appreciate that. And if you do have any questions, feel free to submit them. See a lot of familiar names and see some new names, so that's always great as well. And I always like to start with a positive focus, something positive that happened within the last couple of days or last week. And my positive focus, I guess I have, well, yeah. So my positive focus seems like an unpositive focus at first, but both my kids are 10 and 8, Ryan and Madison, they both came down with a little bit of a cold. And so in this world, we need to make sure that they don't have COVID. So they went to the doctors, had a COVID test. The COVID test came back negative. But the nice thing about that is that I'm very close to my parents. I'm an only child. My parents live 4 houses down, but we've been social distancing due to the pandemic because they're older and I wouldn't want to share anything with them. But because, and so have my kids because of that. We've done things outside and in the garage, but they haven't been inside like my parents' house in a while. So with the negative COVID, even though my kids were sick, my parents, their grandparents were said, hey, send them over, we'll take a cold. And they're able to spend the weekend with them. So they enjoyed that. So it's good to connect in this crazy pandemic world. Someone shared that they're thankful for a caring physician that will text and chat after hours when one has a concern. So thank you for sharing that. And I like to always start any of our team meetings, even my dinners, with a positive focus, as well as these webinars and even our radio show that we do on Sundays, where we start with a positive focus. So with that, I'm going to dig into the questions that have been submitted. And Doug, I saw your question come across, so I'll make sure to address that. So give me a second as I just hit the wrong button. And it's going to take a second for the technology to catch up. But here we go. So now I hit this button. So as we wait for the technology to catch up, it's running a little bit slow today. I have to make clear that anything that we talk about on these webinars are individual. So if you have a specific question, or I'm sorry, anything that I share on these are general. So if you do have a specific question, want to see how this applies to your specific situation, make sure to book some time on my calendar, and you can do that by going to 15chris.com. and you can book some time on my calendar. Now, screen mirroring should be popping up. Come on, screen share. All right, it's not working, so we'll do it this way. All right, give me a second. Oh, this isn't good. All right, never mind. We'll do it this way. So what I'm going to do is share my whiteboard like this. And all right. So the first question that came in was with regards to IRAs. Give me a second. So, and the question was, I don't want to write in red, we'll write in something different. First question was with regards to retirement accounts. So IRAs, 401ks. And the question is, are they protected from Medicaid when in payout mode? All right, so a little background on this question. the way Medicaid works is Medicaid will pay nursing home care. But to qualify for Medicaid, a single individual can only have $2,000 worth of countable assets. A married couple, they would make you spend down your money, and at most you could have $120,000 of countable assets. And so the question is, what are countable assets? Countable assets are everything other than a home, automobile, small cash value of life insurance, personal belongings, prepaid funeral. Everything else is basically a countable asset. So if that's the case, then what about retirement accounts? So retirement accounts are countable assets, whether they're in your name or whether they're in the spouse's name. They're still a countable asset. But some states, and I can't tell you which states off the top of my head, but some states, a lot of the southern states like Florida or Georgia, if your IRA is already paying out due to required minimum distributions, then the IRAs or 401ks are not countable assets. So if the IRA is in payout mode, that retirement account is protected in some states. Unfortunately, in Michigan, the answer is no, that these IRAs are not protected. 401ks, even if they're in payout mode, are not protected. So that's why when we're doing asset protection planning, either pre-planning, a lot of times we're paying the tax on the IRAs ahead of time to move them into the trust. Or if we're doing Medicaid crisis planning, we have a loved one in a nursing home right now, we still have to plan for the IRAs, 401ks. So long story short, IRAs are not protected. All right. And then, so let me get to the second question, and hopefully that's helpful. And again, if something's unclear, feel free to put that into the chat or the question and answer section. Number two, how should, and I apologize for having to retype these, my iPad wasn't connecting. How should I sell my house if it's in a trust? So if you have your house in the trust, question is, how should you look at selling the house? It really kind of depends on the title company, but typically if it's an asset protection trust, so Castle Trust, you would sell directly from the trust and they would write a check to the trust. The advantage of this is that it maintains the asset protection. But your typical revocable trust, a lot of times your realtor or title company will want you to deed the property out of the trust and sell directly from your name. That's why with revocable trust, a lot of times we don't put your deed directly into the trust. We would use something called a ladybird deed. And a ladybird deed says the home is in your name while you're alive, and then upon death, it avoids probate and then goes into the trust. So you wouldn't have to mess around with deeding any properties out of the trust. So it really depends on what type of trust you have. If you have a revocable living trust, typically you'd have a ladybird deed. So selling it from, you'd be selling it typically from your name, not from the trust. If you have an asset protection trust, you for sure want to sell the property from the trust to maintain that asset protection. Question, if IRAs are protected in Georgia, so this is getting back to the previous question. If IRAs are protected, i.e. in Georgia, when taking RMDs, does that mean that you have to take a distribution from all of them if you have more than one? So there's two things to think about here. One is the asset protection nature. And again, I don't practice law in Georgia, so I'm not going to help you get Medicaid qualified in Georgia. We can help people manage their finances in Georgia, but we cannot help people get Medicaid qualified in Georgia. That's why I bring in a elder law attorney in Georgia. But my understanding is that the retirement account would be protected if it's in RMD status. So basically, if you're over the age of 72, that account would be protected. And if you have multiple IRAs, my understanding would be that all of them would be protected. But you could always just start combining them so that you only have one account that you're having to take the RMDs out. So big picture, just understand that in some states, your retirement accounts are protected from the Medicaid or nursing home spend down. In Michigan and most states, they're not. Now, that said, I'm not advocating keeping money in retirement accounts. The big reason why is from a tax perspective. So again, that's why we're talking legal, financial, and tax planning, bringing all these issues together. From a tax perspective, I think taxes are one of the biggest risks and biggest opportunities right now. In fact, I just did a tax webinar where we had 62 people on it last night, going over all the tax issues. And if you're interested in that tax webinar, I can send it out to you. But yeah, so for Medicaid purposes in Michigan, retirement accounts are not protected. In other states, they may be protected, but still, I would not be leaving money, especially for pre-planning, in a pre-tax account like an IRA or 401k, because of the tax consequences of that. All right, so that one I answered. All right, that brings me to our third question, and this is with regards to 529s. So 529s, obviously, well, not obviously, 529s are used for education. So they have to be used for education. Typically, they set it up for education for their kids or now grandchildren. The advantage of the 529s are they grow tax-free. Each state has its own 529. A common question I get is, which 529 should I use? Because it's very controlled. You only have limited options, and each state has its own option, but you're not tied to use the 529 of your state. If I were just looking at all of the 529 plans out there, to choose a 529 plan, I would choose Utah's 529 plan because they have the best mix of investment options that I've seen of all the states. Now that said, being in Michigan, you get a tax deduction if you use the Michigan 529, and it's not horrible in terms of what they offer in terms of investment options. They have a variety of different Vanguard funds. So if you're looking at doing a 529 and you live in Michigan, I'd recommend you do the Michigan 529 because you get tax breaks and their investment options aren't awful. But this question is, what happens if you set up this 529 and the person that you set it up for doesn't use it? So they don't end up using the 529. What happens? What are your options? Well, in the past, what would happen is that you could transfer it to other people. You could use it not just for the initial beneficiary, but you could make someone else the beneficiary. So this was abused because what people would do is, let's say you're a parent, you set up the 529 and the question submitted was, what if the person lucks out and gets a full ride and doesn't need it, or they choose not to go to college? So what happens, long story short, they don't need that 529. In the past, prior to the changes, what would happen is the parent would now use the 529 for themselves, where they would take like driving, auto racing lessons, that could fall under a 529, cooking classes, gardening classes, like adult education used to fall under 529s. So if the 529 wasn't used for the kid, then the adult would use it for like Mario Andretti race car driving training. But a couple of years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, they said that really has to be used for college, high school. And then now, if I'm not mistaken, part of the Secure Act now also allows it to be used for homeschooling, but it still has to be used for school. So your option, if they don't use a 529, is you can transfer that to someone else, maybe another grandchild, maybe another family member, someone else. That would be ideal. Or you can always take the money just out of it, but then you'd have to pay the tax on the growth. And I think that is all, is that you pay tax. There might be a penalty, but I'd have to double check that. So typically what we recommend is just finding someone else to use that 529 for. This next question is a lot of questions regarding kind of nursing home and Medicaid and hospitals today. So this next question is, let's say we have a loved one in a nursing home, and they're on Medicaid. Okay, so they're already Medicaid qualified. And what would happen if we now do third-party payments on their behalf? And this could be paying the nursing home, paying for additional services. How would that affect the person receiving Medicaid? And typically what's going to happen is, if you were to pay additional services, I guess technically from a tax standpoint, that would constitute a gift. Understand the Medicaid person can't be making gifts, but you can give money to someone who's on Medicaid. They just have to spend down the money in the month they receive that gift. So if you pay that facility directly to upgrade the room, you pay for one of those Brookstone $3,000 massage chairs, or if you paid for additional help going in to help that person already on Medicaid, that would not disqualify them. That would not affect their patient pay amount. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we set up Castle trusts in the first place, is that we can move your assets into a trust. And then once you make it 5 years, 100% of what you put in that trust is protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend out. So now you can have Medicaid pay that base level of care, and then you have a pot of resources to pay for additional services to improve your quality of life. And so if you have a loved one in a nursing home on Medicaid, third-party payments, not an issue at all. And that's why the Castle Trust, the way we set it up, it's almost like a third-party payment, where now you have Medicaid or governmental benefits paying this base level care, and you have a pot of resources to pay for additional services to improve quality of life. So not an issue, does not affect the individual's Medicaid qualification. Let me just double check, see if I have any questions. Let's see if there's anything in the chat real quick. Let me open that. All right, so doing good so far. And again, if you do have questions or if something's unclear, feel free to go ahead and put that in the question and answer section or the chat, and I'll try to answer it as I go. All right, next, number 5. If this is with regards to donations and charities, if I were to donate to anything, let's say a hospital, let me move something out of the way real quick. All right, 1 second. Too many windows up. All right. So if I were to, whoops. All right, let me try this question again right here. Chat box is being weird. So if I were to donate to a hospital, should it be done an individual or foundation? So the person's question is getting to that they were at the hospital the other day walking through, and they saw people's names on the wall. And you see this at like museums and that type of thing as well. And so they saw a list of foundations, and they saw a list of individual names or families. And so the question was, is it better to donate as a foundation or individual? In terms of tax benefit, it really doesn't matter. The reason you see foundations typically is that it's a larger nest egg of charitable donations, and they didn't want all the money to go to one specific charity, but instead they set up a charitable foundation that will then distribute to a lot of different charities. A lot more complex to do things that way. This would be more if you're really concerned about estate taxes, have a lot of wealth, and that this is going to be something that's ongoing. So if we're just making small donations here and there, I would say just do it outright in your name. But if this is going to be a legacy that you're going to leave that's going to last a number of years, and you want to appoint someone to run the foundation, understand there's going to be like additional costs and stuff to set it up, additional costs for maintenance of that foundation, then maybe that makes sense. Someone put in a question and answer. Note, some states may count third-party payments as income to the Medicaid recipient. It depends on, so the comment came in with a previous one. Some states may count third-party payments as income to the Medicaid recipient. So let me clarify. With regards to Medicaid, it's a joint state and federal program. I can only advise people in Michigan with regards to Michigan Medicaid. That said, there are some very common themes. And what I'll tell you is that there is attorneys just like myself setting up trusts similar to the Castle Trust in these different states as well as I am. I'm not the only one setting up asset protection trusts. So the common theme of putting assets into the trust, they remain protected, that's going to work in just about every state. Now, some of the details may be a little bit different depending on how you use those third-party payments or what you use those payments for or how you disperse those payments. So that's why in the beginning I said all of this is very general information. Don't run out and go necessarily apply this, make sure that you sit down with a professional who can help you. And if you're talking about Medicaid in a different state, I would recommend a certified elder law attorney in that state, because I can only speak with regards to Medicaid to Michigan in terms of tax planning, investment planning, financial planning. We help clients all over the nation, but in terms of actual legal work and Medicaid crisis planning specifically, that's something we're limited to Michigan. Do you have to be retired to set up a castle trust? So the question just came in, do you have to be retired to set up a castle trust? The answer is no. I have people as young as 18 setting up castle trust. Their dad passed away, they inherited some life insurance money, and so they wanted to make sure that that money would be protected from divorces, creditors, bankruptcies as they're growing up, and then protected for retirement. I myself have a castle trust, and I'm obviously still working. Number 6, what are the steps with a to wrap up a trust? So the issue here is someone passed away. How do we wrap up their affairs? And what happens is estate administration, and there's 4 ways assets transfer out of someone's name. First would be joint ownership. So first would be joint ownership. It passes to whoever you listed joint to. Second would be a beneficiary designation. So if you listed a beneficiary on that life insurance policy, 401k. Third would be through a trust. That's obviously what we want to try to avoid. A trust, a lot of times we have a trust. Fourth would be probate. That's what we want to try to avoid. So if an asset doesn't go through joint ownership, beneficiary designation, trust, then it ends up going into probate. And so what happens when someone passes away and there's a trust? Well, what happens is that first we need to get a death certificate, and that's going to be getting, you're going to get that from the funeral home. They're going to typically reach out to Social Security as well as the VA. And then once you have that death certificate, then it would be a call to our office or whoever prepared the trust to do a certificate of trust. And now the certificate of trust says that the successor trustee can now make decisions like the initial trustee can. So that successor trustee then would send that certificate of trust and that death certificate either to the financial institutions like us, if we're the ones managing the money, or to whatever other financial institutions there are, whether it's Bank of America or Fifth Third or Chase. And then they'd have to follow the terms of the trust. And basically it's wrap up the final affairs, pay off any expenses. Usually that takes a month or 2. And then once we're comfortable, all the expenses are paid, then it would be following the distribution terms of the trust. And whether that's distributions outright or the distributions where now we open up separate share trust for our beneficiaries and we turn over that trust now to the beneficiary. So trusts are typically, well, joint ownership and beneficiary designations are the simplest way to pass assets, but understand there's a lot of problems that go along with those. Joint ownership and beneficiary designations are great for naming a married spouse, but when it comes to naming like kids or other beneficiaries, that's where the trust really shines as typically the best way to pass assets to the next generation. And remember, a will does not avoid probate. A will gives instructions to probate court on how to administer the estate. All right, then our 7th question, where to look for an inheritance. So this question, the person submitted said that someone passed away a number of years ago. There might have been a trust or a will. How do you find out if you were entitled to any benefits? This is a tough question because you can't just like call up different places and say, hey, do you have money that's sitting for me? There's a couple things. First of all, when someone passes away, there should be a will that's recorded at the county. Now that doesn't always happen because that's really only for probate. But anything that's at the county is public record. So you could go to the county and see if a loved one passed away to see if they had a will. Now that might not be helpful because A, the will might not have been recorded. And then B, if the will was recorded, chances are it might say everything goes into a trust, which tells you that there's no assets going through probate. So there's no public record. And that's why a lot of people like a trust because they don't want to create a public record. They want to keep things out of the public record. So really then your only other options would be to try to reach out to maybe the law office that created that last trust but understand with attorney-client privilege, chances are they're not going to share much with you. The only other option, and I think each state has something similar to this, Michigan does as well, and you could probably Google it, but there is a like Michigan lost property, where if you were named as a beneficiary after a certain period of time, it goes to the state of Michigan, and the state of Michigan holds it kind of in a fund for a period of time. And sometimes you'll get notices like there's like personal private detective or private investigator firms that will like kind of go through these records, and they'll send you something and say, hey, we'll take care of this, but we get 10% of the cut. Really, all you have to do is log on to the website, and you could probably find it by, it's like michigan.gov. And then if you just search around for lost property, the site will come up, and then you just fill out a one-page affidavit, send it in, and then they'll notify you if you're entitled to anything. So that would be the route I'd go, is go to the michigan.gov website, click around, or if you email me, I can try to find it and email it over. And then you just submit the one-page form. I've done it a couple times. I think I did inherit like $4,000 from somehow from that. So it's something worthwhile. Someone asked here a couple questions here, so let me knock these down real quick. Can a charitable donation to be decided? Oh, thanks, Mark. Hold on, let me share in the chat the website, all panelists and attendees, so everyone should be able to see this. So that's the michigan.gov website to download the form for any lost money. Here's a question that came in. Can a charitable donation to be decided be set up as a donor advised fund as part of or outside of an asset protection trust or a castle trust? Yeah, so the question is, let's say you set up a castle trust. Can you have a donor advised fund inside of that castle trust? I don't see why not. The only thing I would say is that typically, if you have pre-tax accounts, you haven't paid any income tax, those are going to be the better off to be left to charity because you haven't paid any tax. And if you leave it to charity, there's not going to be any tax. But yeah, basically any investment that you have outside of a trust, you can have it inside of an asset protection trust. Question here, how do you get a death certificate for a family member who has passed away? When they initially pass away, a lot of times the funeral home will get it. If you need an additional death certificate, all you have to do is go to the county that they passed away or that they resided on. I think last time I checked, it cost about $14 to get a death certificate. So typically a funeral home will get you 10 death certificates. If let's say you needed a couple more, you'll just reach out to the county and the county would get you those additional death certificates. All right. Okay, and then I think I have a couple more questions that were already submitted. But again, if you have any more questions or anything you want me to answer, please put it into the chat or the question and answer. All right, and then this last one is lump sum distribution versus a pension, keeping the pension. And this is a really common question. So let's say you're working, you're offered a lump sum buyout, or do you take the employer-sponsored pension? The pension will guarantee income for your life, or maybe life plus a spouse, or life plus a spouse in term, and they'll give you some different options. Or you can take it as a lump sum, roll it over to your IRA, and now take control of it. I would say just in my practice, over the past, it's been kind of 25% would take the pension, 75% would take the lump sum. But I tell you, and going and having these discussions with clients, I'd say now we're at about 90% are taking the pension, maybe only, maybe only less than 10%, or I'm sorry, 90% are taking the lump sum buyout, maybe only 10% are taking the pension. The reason for that, I think, is, first of all, understand with the lump sum, you have a lot more options. Because if you just take the straight pension, it's almost like Social Security, where it's great that you have this guaranteed income, but typically that pension doesn't have any cost of living adjustments. And then also, there's not much you can do with it. Once you flip that switch, you're stuck. You can't make any changes. Versus if you take the lump sum, you roll it over to an IRA, now you have a lot more options, you have a lot more control. So that's one piece of it. Second, from a tax standpoint, understand if you flip on that pension, now you're going to be taxed on that forever. Versus if you take a lump sum, especially if you think taxes are going up in the future, you could take the lump sum, now it's an IRA, now we could do Roth conversions or move it out of the IRA, pay the tax. And now from a tax perspective, you can have a much more tax efficient retirement, as well as what you leave as a legacy to the next generation. And then next, from a long-term care planning standpoint, understand if you take that straight pension and all of a sudden you need nursing home care, all that money goes to the nursing home. Versus if you were to lump sum it, we could protect that money. And then next, why people take the lump sum is if you and your spouse passed away and you didn't take, say, a term of 10 years after that, that pension's gone. Versus if you were to lump sum it out, maybe it's 800,000 or $1 million pre-tax, that would be money that would be left to the next generation. So I would say prior to say 5 years ago, 3/4 of my clients would take the lump sum, 1/4 would take the pension. Now, almost every conversation we have, and again, we're completely agnostic as it comes to like our planning strategies. We always figure out what are your goals, figure out the best strategies, and then pick the right tools. So I don't, either way, like we want to make sure whatever we're doing is in your best interest. So, but that said, when we have these conversations, it's almost always taking the lump sum. So, but again, I'm not saying everyone take the lump sum. I'm saying just walk through the conversation, the decision tree, and understand what you're getting into. That's our approach. Make sure we're educated on the decisions and then make the right decisions. Question asked, how is the lump sum taxed? So the lump sum is typically put into an IRA. So a lot of times the option will be, do I want $2,000 for life that will always be taxed at ordinary income tax rates? Or do I want, say, a lump sum of $800,000 that's now rolled into an IRA that is pre-tax? So we still have a tax issue, but now we can control that tax issue. And so now that we can control that tax issue, let's say we take the lump sum at age 65, we delay taking Social Security from 65 to 70, 72, we can move money out of that IRA, pay the tax. So by the time we reach 70 or 72, we can be in a 0% tax bracket or a very low tax bracket. Versus if we just take the pension, understand your pension, and now you have your Social Security, you're always going to be having this level of tax that you have to deal with, and it's out of your control. That's why, again, I think the biggest thing is people want control, and that's why they take the lump sum. And then even if you wanted that straight income stream, that could be done on the private market versus relying on the company. Because also, I think one of the reasons a lot of people don't take the pension is they understand that it's kind of left with the company, and if something happens to the company, they don't want their pension going away. So they have more faith in the private market than just relying on necessarily the old company. Yeah, so that's all the questions I had submitted ahead of time. Again, most of my clients, they do take the lump sum, but it's something we can have a conversation about for your individual situation. What is the new law for the RMDs? So with the Secure Act that passed last year, there's one more question, I think. Oh, that was Doug's question that was submitted. So we're good there. So the question was, the change in laws with regards to the RMDs. So the RMD law changed recently. So we had the Secure Act that passed December 20th, 2019, which seems like a lifetime ago. And we're doing workshops on the Secure Act. And what the Secure Act did is it pushed back the RMD age from 70.5 to 72. So your pre-tax IRAs, if you have pre-tax IRAs or 401ks, you have to take out required minimum distributions, roughly 3.65%. Well, not roughly, it was exactly 3.65% at age 70.5. And then now what's happened is they push back that RMD age from 70.5 to 72. But again, that's not the real reason they passed the Secure Act. The reason they passed the Secure Act is to shorten the time that your children or beneficiaries can stretch out the taxes upon death. Instead of stretching it out over their lifetime, now they have to pay all the taxes within 10 years. The reason why the government did this, my belief, is that When they passed the Secure Act, we were $22 trillion in debt, and there's $25 trillion sitting in these pre-tax IRA 401k money. And if they tried to go after those while you're alive, most people would be very upset. But by sneaking in the Secure Act 10-year language for your beneficiaries, they thought they could sneak that in without people getting pissed off by that. And then we had the CARES Act that said last year you didn't have to take a RMD. So even if you're required to take a RMD from your pre-tax accounts, you didn't have to take one last year due to the CARES Act that passed. We're still waiting to see what that's going to look like in 2021. But ironically, given the fact that we're $30 trillion in debt, given the fact that the Secure Act passed, given the fact that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is expiring, so all these reasons are why taxes are probably going up in the future, you should be at least taking out your RMD and even more from your pre-tax accounts. So the government's giving you leeway to delay paying taxes, but in reality, and if you disagree with me, I'd be happy to walk you through this. I had a client today, a very wealthy client, who had kind of listened to us talk about like Roth conversions and that type of thing, but he had a problem because he thought his wealth would go down if you pay the taxes now. Your wealth doesn't go down. What goes down if you pay the taxes now and invest them somewhere else is the amount of taxes you pay. And so, again, I think taxes are the biggest risk and biggest opportunity right now with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Secure Act, and then where we see taxes going in the future. I really think it makes sense to look at your specific situation to figure out how much taxes should I pay now, look at your tax brackets, pay the tax and invest it somewhere else. So it's a two-step process. It's how much tax should I pay? How much money should I pull from my IRA 401k? And that's where we look at the tax brackets. And then the second question is, where do we put it? And the easy answer is to do a Roth conversion, but that's not always the right answer or the most beneficial answer. Instead, sometimes we're putting it into an asset protection trust. Or in this situation this morning where I was meeting with someone, while we could put it into Roth, they know they're not going to use all the money during their lifetime. They're somewhat wealthy. So they're not going to put it into the Roth. What they're doing is they're leveraging it and putting it into life insurance. So now instead of leaving their daughter, say $100,000 tax-free, they can leave their daughter $200,000 using the leverage of life insurance. So the first step is always how much to convert. The second step is where do we put it? Question, do you have a new key financial data sheet for 2021 like we did for 2020? The answer is yes. So call pass on attendees. So we do have a new key data sheet that has all of these numbers like tax brackets and everything. So if you do want that, email me at contact@castlewealthgroup.com and just in the subject line put key data and I'll get that out to you. It's just preliminary, but we do have it already prepared. Then another question that came in here, what for electrical computer keeps on. So I'm not, this question is about like, what about long-term care, keeping some in the IRA? There's different strategies. I'm not saying everyone should just liquidate their IRA. Everyone's situation is a little bit different. One of the things that we can do is we can do what's called asset-based long-term care. And we can do asset-based long-term care strategies inside of an IRA. So understand every situation is a little bit different. I'm not saying everyone just go out and liquidate all of their IRAs or pay it all at once, but just having intelligent discussions to figure out what is best in your situation. And again, that's why I started this webinar, understanding that what I'm throwing out is general ideas. If any of these ideas of our interest, then we need to figure out and decide whether it makes sense to explore that idea. So just like I was meeting with a client earlier today, and he had his own, he took a CFP class on his own, very, very intelligent gentleman, very wealthy. But it was eye-opening for him to see that A, if we pay the taxes now, I'm not actually lowering my wealth, I'm lowering the amount I'm paying in tax. And then B, understanding that now that I do have my income needs covered for my life, maybe I should look at things I can leverage my legacy. So everyone's situation is a little bit different, is what I'm trying to get at. Okay, any other questions? Give everyone a second to put in a question if they have one. Answered all the ones that came in. Let me double check the chat. Death certificates. All right. Looks like with that, answered all the questions this week. I certainly do appreciate it. I look forward to you joining us next week. Something exciting right before this, I was interviewed talking about kind of COVID and vaccines going into nursing homes. So if you have a loved one in a nursing home, what are the issues with regards to getting them vaccinated? So that should be an interview that should be airing shortly. And when I get that, I'll share that via email, because it is an interesting discussion. If you do have a loved one in an assisted living nursing home, and now they're talking about the vaccines coming out, how do you give approval for that loved one for them to get the vaccine, or maybe disapproval? And that's where medical powers of attorney come into play. So look for that. I'll send that out via email as soon as as soon as I get the link. So with that, thank you, everyone. I'll talk to you next week. If you have questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out. Dana, thank you. You're welcome. It's my pleasure. I really enjoy these. Thank you. Take care.